For years, the United States has held Cuba under a deadly trade embargo, and in 2021, the UN General Assembly held a vote to see if this should be allowed to continue. 184 countries voted that the US should no longer be allowed to strangle Cuba, while Israel and the United States themselves voted that they should. So if everybody recognizes that the embargo is murderous and unnecessary, how is the US able to keep it going? Well, one of the ways that they do it is through propaganda from outlets like the New York Times, which Noam Chomsky calls out in his new book, The Withdrawal. Chomsky draws attention to this NYT article from 2021, which is just riddled with lies to an almost unbelievable degree. For one, they say that the embargo has been adjusted so that it won't block food and medicine from getting to Cuba. But the source that they cite doesn't say that at all. And that's probably because it's not true. This is a systematic analysis from Cuban philosopher Carlos Garrido about the ways that the US embargo does in fact affect the Cuban healthcare system. The embargo does in fact stop Cuba from getting medicine, and it prevented them from getting the COVID vaccine during the pandemic. And when Cuba went ahead and created their own vaccine recipe, the US embargo blocked the import of syringes, so they couldn't distribute it to their people. But tell us more about how the US embargo doesn't affect the Cuban healthcare system, New York Times. The article also has the audacity to criticize the Cuban government for spending too much money on COVID. Maybe if you guys weren't blocking the import of vaccines and medicine, they wouldn't have to. Moving on to the most egregious lie, this article says that the embargo doesn't matter because the US sells millions of dollars worth of agricultural goods to Cuba every year. But the source that they cite here from the Congressional Research Service literally says the opposite of what they claim it does. It says that because of the embargo, US agricultural exports to Cuba remain incredibly low. And it even says that if the embargo was altered, US agricultural exports to Cuba could expand markedly. So I don't know, either they didn't read the source that they cited, or they're just lying about it to make it seem like the US embargo isn't that bad. And lastly, this article attacks the Cuban government for claiming that certain music artists and intellectuals are backed by the CIA, while neglecting to tell their readers that the CIA has in fact spent millions of dollars backing anti-communist music artists and intellectuals in Cuba. Seems like kind of an important fact to just overlook. This piece from the New York Times is not journalism. This is propaganda. Propaganda aimed at continuing the starvation and strangling of Cuban citizens by the world's largest empire. The two journalists who wrote this should be ashamed, and I wish Noam Chomsky would have called them out by name. They are foot soldiers of the American empire who are using their intellect to justify one of the most murderous trade policies that's ever existed. Couldn't be me.